This video examines techniques of melodic transformation that are evident in The Art of the Fugue by J.S. Bach. The Art of the Fugue is a collection of fugues and canons. Specifically, the fugues tend to feature 3 or 4 voices. Interestingly, the instrumentation of these voices is unspecified, so you just wrote these in open score, and recordings feature any number of different instrumentations. For instance, you'll find recordings for saxophone ensemble, organ, piano, viol consort, brass quartet, brass quintet, woodwind quintet, anything in between. The collection was written between 1740 and 1750. Bach died in 1750, as you might remember from music history, and he left 1 fugue incomplete at that time. This collection is historically significant because it showcases complex contrapuntal processes. This is really where you would go just to study the actual technique of writing fugues. There's so many different devices that he shows off here. But even more interesting, at least in my opinion, is that each piece is based on the same subject. So not only is he going out of his way to showcase different possible contrapuntal combinations, but he's also transforming a very simple melody in a bunch of different contexts. And this casts even more attention onto the manipulations themselves. There are a number of features of the art of the fugue that one could spend many, many hours studying, but today we're going to focus on one specific feature, specifically the techniques that Bach uses to transform the subject into different versions of itself. These techniques include transposition, embellishment or ornamentation, inversion, augmentation, and diminution. Let's start with transposition. As you likely know by now, transposition moves the entire melodic segment up or down. There are different subtypes of this. One option is to preserve all specific intervals. So a melodic major third would stay a melodic major third, a melodic minor second would stay a melodic minor second. Commonly, however, when transposing, it's possible to preserve all the generic intervals but adjust some of the qualities. For instance, a major third might change to a minor third, or a minor second might change to a major second. Another option is to preserve the general contour, but adjust some of the generic intervals. So a perfect fifth might change to a perfect fourth, a major sixth might change to a perfect octave. As long as enough of the original is preserved and the general contour is present, we experience it as some sort of transposition, even though there might be several small adjustments in interval size. All right, so let's take a look at Bach's subject. This is the basic subject from the first fugue, and it sounds like this. As you can see in here, this version of the fugue subject is in D minor, which indeed is the key of the entire set. Now let's compare this statement to a statement later in that first fugue that begins and ends on A. Looking through this, you see that we have a G sharp. So this is a statement of the fugue that has been transposed up a fifth to A minor. The only note that does not belong to A minor is the B flat, as you likely noticed. Indeed, this is the only part of this statement that is not an exact transposition. So in the original, the F to the E is a half step, the E to the D is a whole step. That's been changed in this transposed version so that we have a whole step followed by a half step. But other than that minor adjustment, it's a pretty close transposition here. Let's compare this to an earlier statement that begins on A. Like the previous one, this statement has a B flat rather than the B natural that would have been included in an exact transposition. And as you also likely noticed, we have a D instead of the expected E towards the beginning. However, this maintains the same contour. we go up and then we come back down. The only difference is that we've changed what was originally a fifth up and a third down to a fourth up and a second down. Let's look at a couple other examples. Here we have a hypothetical statement. This is not one that actually appears in Bach's version of the fugue, but this is what it would have looked like if we had taken the D minor original and transposed it up by fourth to G minor. Now let's compare that to a statement that actually does occur in the fugue. Looking through this, it is clearly related to the opening fugue subject, and it's actually also closely related to my hypothetical statement that I've included here. Specifically, the middle chunk of this is identical to that transposition to G minor, though the beginning and the end are left, or do not exactly follow that transposition in G minor. Interestingly, the beginning and the middle are actually more similar to the A minor statement that we saw earlier. So here, everything has been transposed up, but parts of it have been transposed up by fifth, and parts of it have been transposed up by fourth in this case. The altered hybrid version that occurs at the very end of this fugue sounds like this. So this example includes far more adjustments than the other two, but it still counts within the realm of transposition. We've just had a few more adjustments in terms of what are some of the melodic intervals. Specifically, the first melodic interval, the A to the D, is a fourth rather than a fifth, and here, where all the other statements had a second, we have an ascending third. Now let's move on to embellishment and ornamentation. An embellishment essentially is either adding a note or altering the duration of some of the notes. This typically increases the rhythmic complexity while preserving the general outline. Common options for additions include neighbor notes, passing tones, suspensions, and skips in the same harmony. Notice that neighbor notes and passing tones and skips would involve introducing an additional note, whereas the suspension really relies on sustaining a note past where it would have in the original before it resolves down. Let's take a look at this. Here is our friend, the opening original subject again, and let's compare that to what happens at the opening of the fifth fugue. So here's the original one more time. And here's the version that appears in Contrapunctus 5. This version adds two notes that were not present in the original. Notice that both of them in this case are functioning as passing tones. The first getting the G appearing between the A and the F, and the E appearing between the F and the D. And then additionally, in the third measure of this excerpt, the rhythm has been altered slightly, including the dotted rhythm, which brings a nice unity to the statement of the subject. So we have that dotted quarter followed by an eighth note 3 times total here. Next up is inversion. Inversion reverses the direction of intervals. Up becomes down, down becomes up. So let's see what this looks like. And we'll compare two excerpts within Contrapunctus 5. So here is the version that we just heard a second ago with the dotted rhythms introduced. Now let's compare that to the very opening statement immediately prior in this fugue. As you can see, the two are basically mirror images of each other, where the top, I'm going to refer to these as top and bottom, even though they're not at the same time in the fugue, where the top part would start with a descending fifth and then ascending steps. The bass clef variant here starts with a leap up by fifth and descending steps. Augmentation uniformly increases the duration of notes, usually by a factor of 2 or 4. And what I mean by that is if you're increasing by a factor of 2, you're doubling that note value. So for instance, a quarter note would become a half note. If you're increasing by a factor of 4, then a quarter note would become a whole note. Diminution is the reverse procedure of that. Diminution uniformly decreases the duration of notes, usually by a factor of 2 or 4. Here is our friend, the subject, in Contrapunctus 5 again, and let's compare that to 2 versions from Contrapunctus 7. So what I have here is you'll notice that getting from the half note here becomes a whole note here, so the durations have been doubled. The dotted quarter here becomes a dotted half note, and that has been doubled, and that's true all the way through the rest of this statement. Elsewhere in Contrapunctus 7, we have a very fast variant of this, starting with a quarter note instead of a half note or a whole note. Moving down the chart, so from the short note values to the longer note values is the process known as augmentation. The reverse is known as diminution. So going from the longer note values and getting increasingly shorter is the process of diminution. I'm going to play all 3 of these, starting with the fast variant at the top, the short note values. So in other words, I will illustrate augmentation. Here's another pair of excerpts that illustrate the same process. This is also from Contrapunctus 7, using the answer variant of the subject in this case. Again, I'll start at the top and work down. So in this video, we discussed transposition, embellishment, inversion, augmentation, and diminution. All of these techniques can be applied to themes or short motives in many different genres and style periods. So these concepts, even though I've illustrated them through the art of the fugue, are not limited to just Baroque fugues. They're not even limited to fugues in general. These are common developmental procedures that you'll see in a wide variety of music.